First of all, you asked if I've been impacted by climate change. I'm a rural resident in Hamilton, and I can tell you that in two ways I'm impacted by climate change already. One, we've started to get ice storms in the winter time, which is very unusual, and I was without power for 5 days a couple of Christmases ago. Secondly, I rely on a well, and I'm seeing increasingly that my water supply is not as strong as it used to be. So those are two local immediate impacts for me. I want to address one particular aspect of climate change to assist with reducing greenhouse gases, which we know are a main cause of climate change. In today's Globe and Mail, Brian Mulroney, former Prime Minister, who is also obviously a lobbyist for the energy industry, is quoted as encouraging the Prime Minister to take charge of the Energy East file. And I agree with that sentiment. But I don't agree with Brian Mulroney's recommendation, which is to push it through to implementation as quickly as possible. Prime Minister Trudeau and his Minister of Climate Change and Environment, McKenna, signed up to Canada to meet the goal of keeping climate change impact to a rise of 2 degrees, and indeed promoted also the aspirational goal of keeping it to 1.5 degrees in the Paris climate talks last December. We already see climate change is leading to significant impacts in terms of storms, droughts, spreading insect damage, both in Canada and around the world. So this 2-degree goal cannot be reconciled with the continued expansion of the Alberta tar sands. Canada's already behind on its former greenhouse gas reduction targets, which, by the way, are still not adequate to meet the goal. But it's being driven by our current level of fossil fuel production and usage. So staying at the current level does not require new pipelines. Really, reducing production does not require new pipelines. So fundamentally, we do not need to build Energy East if we in any way plan to meet our commitments to the Paris reductions. Energy East and other pipelines can only be driven by the intention to grow our oil sands production. This is for the benefit of a few oil companies who want to export the oil and not refine it in Canada. And the profits of those companies in large part will also be exported from Canada for no benefit to Canadians. Some Canadians would benefit from the pipeline and tar sands expansion through a short-term increase in production, through jobs. But why build a pipeline infrastructure that can last for 30 to 40 years when we have to dramatically reduce the fossil fuel emissions in the same time period to meet our climate commitments and to provide the prospect of a decent life for future generations? Energy East is stated to cost $15.7 billion to build. That's a lot of zeros. A commercial-grade wind turbine costs between $3 and $4 million and generates 2 megawatts of power. So for the cost of Energy East, we could install nearly 4,000 2-megawatt wind commercial turbines, which is essentially the same amount of power that all of Ontario's nuclear energy produces, which is 60% of our electricity consumption. So I've got 4 inputs to the government discussion on climate change. The first is the government must stay true to the commitment to the global community on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050. Secondly, they should look at the long-term rather than short-term investment in the economy and jobs by urgently building out our renewable energy infrastructure. We're missing out on the development of a renewable energy industry. We already buy our wind turbines from Denmark and from South Korea, while we face declining steel and manufacturing industries in Canada. Thirdly, you cannot leave it to the marketplace to resolve climate change, whereas the climate change we receive now is as a result of the current marketplace. And we all play our part in that, both as consumers and as investors. So we need governments to act with strong regulation and financial incentives using both positive and negative taxation. We must have a national carbon tax implemented, and it needs to be significant. My fourth point is, I think you've already gathered it, a decision to allow Energy East is in complete conflict with your climate commitments. You must keep promises which benefit the whole Canadian and global community, not support a pipeline which primarily benefits overseas investors produces a few short-term jobs at the expense of immediate and long-term environmental disaster. Thank you.